But I like to look at this in the way that the Chinese look at it, and there's a brilliant explanation to this, because this is the Chinese symbol for crisis. And the Chinese symbol for crisis is made up of two different characters, danger plus opportunity. And if you like, that encapsulates the whole climate change challenge for me in terms of how we might address it and how we might see it as a positive opportunity as well. Because in terms of art, we've been very good historically at creating utopian ideals, like visions of a positive future, this one in particular, the kind of the pastoral, idyll, very bucolic type of vision. But I think, unfortunately, it's much easier to do dystopia. It's much easier for us to look to the negative, to actually use quite challenging and depressing imagery in order to try and snap people out of the now and the reverie and motivate them to do something else. And I don't think it works. We're just good at focusing on the threat of Armageddon and apocalypse. And the reason that this doom and gloom approach is problematic is the fact that it disempowers people. And the trouble is, we need to have collective action and individual responsibility. And that's the only way you solve the climate change riddle. And if you like, the challenge of the bystander effect is a fundamental one. Because what the bystander effect says is if you fall over and hurt yourself in the street, you better hope there's only one person there to help you. Because if there's only one person, they will step in. If you fall over and hurt yourself in the street and there's a crowd of people there, everyone will go, oh, he's fallen over in the street. I really hope someone goes and helps him. And we abdicate individual responsibility. And so the problem with climate change is we all go, oh my God, it's such a big, huge, pressing, scary problem. Someone must be doing something about it, right? And unfortunately, that someone is each and every one of us as individuals. So to conclude, I think it's worth coming back to this kind of message of hope that we talked about right at the beginning. In terms of the Obama campaign, in terms of the kind of the motivatory power of a positive future. And I use the example here of Martin Luther King, because if he'd stood up in the 1960s and given a speech which went, I have a nightmare. I have a nightmare of a racially and socially segregated United States. I have a nightmare about dysfunctional communities. I have a nightmare about where my country is going. Would we still be talking about that speech today? Now, I'd wager we wouldn't. And I think, unfortunately, on environment and climate change, we still are, to a greater or lesser extent, giving the nightmare speech. Thank you very much. Can I pause for questions now, or we can go straight into budget? What would people like to do? Are there any burning questions? I feel weird chairing myself, which is slightly odd. Well, it gives me control of things anyway.
Were you going to tell us about how artists or writers can get involved with Futerra?
With Futerra? I wasn't planning on doing it, but yes, I mean, one of the best ways, I think, is probably to look through the publications that we've already produced in terms of the rules of the game and the new rules of the new game, which are all about understanding how the psychology of the public works around climate change and around environmental challenges generally. And I think there's a lot of insights contained in those which will inform work. Often we get quite a bit of pushback from artists who say, we're not propagandists. You're a propagandist. You've got an agenda, you're trying to change things. We're just trying to provoke and challenge and not necessarily steer people in one direction. Now, I'd push back against that to a certain extent because I think we've all got responsibility here. Now, if you can't find creative inspiration from the biggest collective and most pressing challenge that we've ever collectively faced, then you're probably looking in the wrong place. And climate change is fantastic in terms of a source of inspiration because it affects us socially, it affects us economically, and it affects us environmentally. Every sphere of life can be influenced or can influence climate change. And so I think there's huge amounts of creative potential for finding interesting ways of engaging people. And also, we've produced several films about this, and just looking at our website and connecting in with other networks like the Compass Network, which we set up, which is for communicators around climate change. And there's more and more resources around art and climate change available online. Now, it has to be said, I think a lot of them are pretty awful. I think we're only just starting to understand how we frame this very complex challenge in a digestible and engaging way for the public. And it's not easy. And I can kind of take a step back and go, my job here is as a provocateur, not as someone offering all the solutions. But what we've tried to do is offer some guidance on how artists could best do that.
What sort of experiences have you had with NGOs? I work for one, as I mentioned earlier, but I find there's a tremendous lack of imagination and innovation in the NGO community to the point of sheer rage and frustration. And I wonder how if you've been able to do any sort of positive work to get them away from the doom and gloom message. I mean, when Obama talks about climate change at the moment, it's prefaced by starting off with, we need to sort out the economy, we need jobs, we want security, we want 5 million new jobs, etc., etc., etc. Plus, we get a clean, safe planet to live on. That's how he does it. So, I wonder what your experience is.
It's a brilliant reframing of the argument. I mean, there's two issues there. I think some NGOs do it very well, and I think some of Greenpeace's campaigns and Friends of the Earth's campaigns are quite clever. I don't say everyone does it well, but I think there are some kind of beacons of light in terms of trying to take a positive, solutions-oriented type of approach. The big problem is, and this is more endemic of the environment sector generally, is the fact that we're not all the same. And everyone who works in advertising and marketing, who's very skillful at slicing audiences up into specific target groups, will tell you this, is that you can crudely cut the UK population into 3 chunks. And I do this very generically, but about 25% of us are settlers. We don't like change. We're very home and security oriented. We think yesterday was better. It's kind of your classic Daily Mail reader. Doesn't want to change. Doesn't want to engage in those kind of things. Then there's a middle chunk, a very fluid chunk of about 45% of people who are prospectors, who are sort of fashion and status driven, like badges and symbols of success, move with trends, want to look good and want to be perceived to be successful by their peers. Then at the top you've got pioneers, which is where most people in NGOs come from. Now they are people who, and I include myself in them, it's people who are ethically motivated, are trying to do the right thing, have a strong moral imperative, like discovering new stuff and do things because they're the right thing to do, whether anyone else is doing them or not. Now the trouble is a lot of NGO messaging is aimed at pioneers. Pioneers are bloody good at talking to other pioneers. The trouble is, if you talk to prospectors like pioneers, they don't hear it, they just cut it out. And so much of the environmental debate has been focused in this kind of pioneer camp. The prospectors are just carrying on regardless and going, and easily boxing it all up and saying, well, just put that in the eco box, and I'm not an environmentalist, so it's nothing to do with me, it's not relevant. And Futerra's done a lot. I mean, I can talk about this for hours, so you're going to have to stop me. I'm going to have to stop myself because I'm showing myself. But that's the problem with a lot of NGO engagement. Unfortunately, is I think we intuitively try to talk to other people as we would like to be spoken to ourselves, and therefore misjudge them and get it wrong.